Well, another year, another rut forecast. And, you know, this one's going to be different. I try to mix these up a little bit, but I really want to give you the hunting tools or strategies that'll help you navigate through the rut. That's very important to me. And, you know, the rut is not, there's not some magic date in your area where it's going to happen. I don't like rut guides that vary from year to year because it has been proven many, many times over. The rut takes place in your area at the same time every year. And that's the message of this video, not to mention how to hunt and navigate that. Because once you figure that out, it really frees a lot up in your head. Because then you can plan on this taking place this time, very methodically. Everything else doesn't make sense, that it's going to be an early rut or a late rut. Very unfortunate because that can guide you. I've literally had people in, say, November 10th, in Wisconsin, and they're saying the rut hasn't started yet. Folks, you know what happens in November 10th, 12th, when you're saying the rut hasn't started yet? You missed it, or you're waiting for the last couple days. So when you're misguided, in that case, by 2 weeks or more, then you not only missed the rut, you missed the pre-rut, the rut lockdown, the peak rut, the post-rut, and you missed all those hunting strategies going along with that. So if you're just waiting for a rut and sign to take place, and you're not actually going into these certain areas where you should be hunting to take advantage of the rut for those few days of the year that are the same every few days every year, then you're going to be really behind, and you're going to be behind every year. And I want you to find consistent rut success like I have going back into the early 90s. And this is something that's pretty foolproof. And again, it happens at the same time. And we're going to talk about when for your area, even including the South, and some strategies might be a little bit different for the South. But first of all, just understand it takes place at the same time every year. It doesn't have anything to do with the moon, the weather, anything. Deer are going to be bred at the same time. Now, when it comes to weather, it's critical. And that's how I hunt, meaning that rut sign during daylight is going to take place much more when the conditions are right. If it's very hot, if it's very windy, if it's bad weather, deer, does are still going to be bred at night, but they're not going to express a lot of that movement during the daylight just because it's a bad rut. And you can look at some of the ruts that were good, some of the ruts that are bad in the past. You can look at years like 2012, 2013. If you look at you can go to Weather Underground, and you can look at a monthly chart of the weather, and it'll give you the wind speed, wind direction, temperature, and you look at those. And when you see that greatest variance, where there's a zigzag line through there compared to another month, that tells you the weather was volatile, and that tells you during that rut you had a good rut because it gave you a lot of swings from warm temperatures to cold temperatures, so it gets bucks on their feet. First, I want to thank you guys so much for buying and trying our food plot seed blends. Now I want to introduce to you our switchgrass blends, and I say blend because we have a southern variety and a northern variety specific to your region. We have a base seed that goes into that's specific to you. And then we have a couple of moderately height stiffening varieties within there so that we can make sure that your stand of switchgrass stays up longer. Check them out on our website. Thank you guys so much. We've sold seed now in over 40 states, and we really appreciate you trying us out. Check out our switchgrass on our site, www.whiteail-solutions.com. And just for the fact alone that they miss feedings when there's inclement and bad weather, nasty weather coming through, they feed 5 times rhythmically in a 24-hour period. So if they're missing feedings, they have to make up for that. And when they're burning energy during the rut, it just really puts the rut on fire when you have those major weather swings. So very, very important. Now, people will say, this is what's interesting, and this is why I don't like rut watches, because someone will report the rut watch in southern Michigan. They're seeing active rutting sign, and a neighbor 2 miles away is not. I'm here to tell you, folks, even looking at biologically, with young bucks, they might make handful of rubs, 1 or 2 scrapes a year on their own. Mature buck may make 300 rubs, dozens of scrapes in a year. So what does that mean? What does that translate? It means if you're not seeing a lot of sign, you probably don't have a lot of mature bucks in the area. Those mature bucks know the game. They're going to be moving around a little bit earlier. They're going to be making sign, and earlier meaning maybe they move a half hour earlier in the day, so that puts them in front of your stand. Maybe they leave a lot of signs, so it gives the appearance that the rut's on full swing here, and someone else saying there's no rut. Well, they probably don't have old bucks This person has older bucks, and that's why there can be a difference in sign just 2 miles apart. It's not like some magical dividing line, state line, county line, that it changes from one to the other. Even if you look up timing, I've worked really hard with this with HuntWise, because we have HuntCast, and we really try to follow exactly what's going on in your area. So they blended between real world experience and hunting experience and when these ruts take place. That would be the typically accepted rut time that people are actually hunting, people that are actually living out in the woods and hunting to a very high level and being successful, compared to state agencies. State agencies, every one of them records the rut data as different. And if you look at some of the rut maps online, and I've seen these professionally created, where even in the state of Georgia, you'll have a pocket of counties here, different timing than a pocket of counties here, different timing than a pocket of counties here. And oh, by the way, when it flips over into another state nearby, the state line is the dividing line of timing for rut. Deer don't have a state line dividing line in their brain where once they cross this line, it's either rut on or rut off. And you can either see that from Ohio to Pennsylvania to Indiana to Michigan. You can see great disparity from one state line to the other. And the reason for that isn't because deer are breeding at a different time across state lines. It's because the collection process of rut data and predicting the rut and when the rut actually takes place is different from one to the other. And I'll give you an example. Some states calculate the second rut in with a peak rut. They look at it all as one rut, one primary rut. So you can imagine if 30% of the rut is taking place during the second rut, and you blend that in with 30 days earlier, it shows the rut taking place overall over a 7-week period, 6-week period, when really it's taking place in a 2 or 3 week period here, and then it's skipping a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then it's beginning again for a week, week and a half. And when the rut is not in place, then those bucks, when they're right after they're done with the rut, even if the second rut is 10 days away, they're just laying around doing nothing. They're recuperating. They don't move much. So if you plan on the rut taking place and finding rutting activity on the 17th of November in Wisconsin, you're going to be sorely mistaken. If you're thinking rut activity is going to take place on December 1st in Southeast Ohio, you're sorely mistaken. Kentucky, same thing. On the flip side, if you think the rut's going to take place on October 25th in West Virginia, it hasn't happened yet. It's not going to happen yet. Southern Illinois, not going to happen until early November, not middle or say the 25th of October. So you have to know these timings for each one of these states. And you'll see from around central Michigan down to the south, it happens a little bit later. So I can hunt the rut up here, peak rut on the 5th of November, 6th of November, 7th, Wisconsin. If I tag out, I can go down to Ohio and hunt the same peak rut conditions, same strategies that we'll talk about here in a second, during a week later, 10 days. You know, the 12th, the 15th, the 17th of November. I've actually gone down in Ohio the Sunday before Thanksgiving, just to hunt a couple days, Monday and Tuesday, following a major cold front. There's 50-mile-an-hour winds, 40-degree temp drop. I get down there, I put in 2.5 hours and shot one of our target bucks out on public land with a bow. And it's because I'm following the timing that took place in Wisconsin just 10 days earlier, week and a half earlier, something like that. So same conditions, just down. Then when you go up north, that rut gets more defined, because if fawns are born too early in the snow, they die. If they're born too late and the body size is too small going into the winter, they die. So you really have to understand that it almost tightens up. That begins early, ends earlier in the north. But once you get into more like central Wisconsin, central Michigan, southern New York, and down south, it's more of a layered effect until you get to the south. And we'll talk about that and the timing of that. But I hope that makes sense for early rut sign and late rut sign, even within the same area. It's really what it has to do with, but you have to watch for that. You know, one of the really cool indicators, and I just put an indicator that we see around here of when the rut is starting to take shape, and I'm talking about the preseason or the pre-rut, is we don't have a lot of bucks. You know, buck movement, rut movement doesn't take place till the rut. So obviously they're not cruising field edges. They're not cruising between bedding areas. And one of the things they don't do at 10 o'clock in the morning, noon, 2 in the afternoon, is typically hit water holes, because they're bedding dry all day. They hit water on the way to food. They feed on luscious green vegetation all night, hopefully somewhere, maybe on your food plots, maybe on a distant ag field off of public land, that quenches their thirst, and they don't drink the water in the morning. But however, once the pre-rut starts taking place, those bucks are getting a little bit more gamey. Even a tracking collar might show they're not moving, they're staying there, but they moved within a 5-acre area, making rub scrapes. They're being active. Then they go hit water at 10 o'clock, noon, 2 o'clock. So when we see the water use pick up in the morning, then we know the pre-rut's on. It's a really cool indicator. Let's talk about 2021. Last year we had a critical rut forecast of hunting and went out and shot a buck here in Minnesota on one night within that forecast, early, end of October, early November. I think it was the 31st of October, 30th of October, and then I shot one 2 days later in Wisconsin, both over water holes. But it was that typical rut lockdown to peak rut time where it's great, great time to hit the woods during that rut. And so to me, it was cold front time. Cold front time. I still hunt cold fronts during the rut. I might hunt lesser stands. I might get out in the woods still. But really, I'm putting all my eggs into those cold front times. And I've been rewarded over and over and over again by sitting, even during the season. Dylan and I are going out tonight. I'm sure we'll sit next week when he's in town. And other than that, I'll sit next week. I'll sit into October a couple times. Dylan's back at some point in there. And then I'm going to Saskatchewan to hunt the last week of October. And so I'm going to hunt up into that sparingly, but it'll be all about cold fronts. So when I get back, I'm on cold fronts. And I'll still go out in the woods here and there, but I'm not hunting every day because we have other things to do. Like you, I have to work. And part of work is going out in the woods, but part of the work is doing this. We shoot 208 videos a year. So there's a lot of other things to do. And so I need to maximize my time afield and make sure I'm efficient with my life, and following the weather is guiding me to success. That's why I work so hard with HuntWise on RutCast and on HuntCast to make sure we get it to right to help you guys. Because we're not helping you guys, and why even make or bother with any of this stuff? So I do it because it works. It works for me, and I want it to work for you too. But those 2021 cold front bucks, it was just ideal conditions for major cold front coming through right during that time of peak rut lockdown change, and great time to be in the woods, and was very rewarded. So we'll talk about the timing again here a little bit, and I've tried to touch on that a little bit going in here, but let's just I look at these phases of the rut: the pre-rut, the rut lockdown, the peak rut, and then the post-rut. And of course, there's a second rut, and that takes place, to me, you look at this pre-rut lockdown, it takes place about 4 weeks later. Just look as a general rule. So if your peak rut is the November 5th, then you can look at early December in your area, you're going to experience a second rut. Now, maybe it's only 20% of the does, maybe it's 40% of the does, maybe it's 10. But bottom line is there's a great flurry of activity for rutting, and most people they're thinking about their bowling league by then. They're doing something else, thinking about ice fishing, whatever it is, thinking about the holidays. The most missed quality time in the deer woods is that second rut. So you just, for second rut, just add that time. And fast forward about 4 weeks from your pre-rut lockdown phase. And then I'm hunting it like the pre-rut, lockdown, peak rut. And these kind of combine. So I'm looking at bedding areas, morning, food source in the afternoon. And typically they're not moving much during the day. They're not just running all day long during the second rut. But let's go to the pre-rut. Pre-rut, yeah, there's a chance you can catch a mature buck on a food source in the evening, but he's not moving much during the day. This is not the time for an all-day sit. This is really a time to take to your morning stands for the first time. What's a morning stand? AM, bedding areas. So I'm focusing on the back side of a bedding area. I like coming into a back end around approach, where I'm coming around, getting in the edge of that bedding area, and allowing those deer to come to me with the winds blowing to my downwind area where they're not coming from. That downwind approach where I'm actually entering the stand, and then in front of me is free and clear. Awesome time to pick off a buck before November, before the peak rut even begins. You have that pre-rut time. Pre-rut in southern Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia might take place in your area in first part of November. But some of these northern states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, that's taking place more at October 24th, October 22nd, October 28th, somewhere around in there. So you get to experience that pre-rut a little bit earlier. Again, that 10-day window difference where you're going from one to the other, one property to the other, one state to the other to hunt. I really, in red here, focusing on bedding area. That's where I want to focus on. So imagine, pre-rut doesn't mean there's a lot of does coming in. There's a starting to doe here and there might come in. But that's that exponential start. When you have the rut curve like this, the peak rut, then you come down a little bit, and then you have the second rut. Pre-rut is about right here, just to the beginning of exponential growth. So all of a sudden, bucks know it's ready. These mature bucks know. And they're laying down a lot of sign, they're getting ready. And there might even be does coming in. All of a sudden, a doe here and there starts coming in, and then more and more. Then all of a sudden, during the lockdown, from this point to this point right here, a whole bunch of does are coming into heat. Not the majority of them, but just enough Because let's face it, there's more does than bucks. So every buck gets invited to the party. A lot of people don't realize that in a given rut, any buck might breed 2 to 4 does. That's about it. They're not breeding 10 doe. Every buck participates in the rut. The young bucks, old bucks, doesn't really matter. I think older bucks have more control of when they breed, but it still takes 2-3 days to fight off other bucks to breed that doe. This isn't like a 5-minute process like you see on TV. It just wham, bam, they're done. It's not like that. It takes a little bit of time. They have to fight off. They can tell that doe's coming into heat a couple days in advance, if not more. So it really takes a little bit of time. But that lockdown, when is a buck coming off a doe? That's a little bit different. You know, when are they coming off a doe? Could be any time. So I'm looking at that X pattern between feeding, between bedding, thick cover, areas that bucks can cruise through anytime during the day. They're not going out into the open at a food source, but you're not locked into a bedding area where if they're not there, you don't get to see them all day. I'm looking for that movement in between. That's a good time for it to start maybe thinking about an all-day sit, because this stand is that perfect X of movement. Peak rut, so they could be anywhere, anytime. I'm still focusing on the bedding area because in cooler temperatures, it'll show that bucks move 3 times longer in the morning hours than the afternoon hours. There's just more opportunity. A lot of times they need to take a break. They can't just run 24 hours straight. Imagine the activity that they're displaying at night when it's cool, there's no pressure, they can go anywhere they want. They move miles and miles at night. They need to rest at some point. They can't just keep going like that. When do they rest? Middle of the day. Not to say there's not movement during the middle of the day. It can happen. It's worth an all-day sit if you're in that X of movement, but I really try to focus on bedding, morning movement, afternoon, food source movement, and really to maximize each time of the day. And in the evening, or in the midday, a lot of times a lot of midday movement is in between bedding area. So I might sit in between bedding area in the morning, sit till 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, get out and go move to an afternoon, evening food source stand location. That's a really good strategy because then I'm looking at that as in like 3 sits during the peak rut. You know, what's going to happen in the morning, midday, and afternoon, and I'm trying to slant my sits so that I'm sitting 1/3 of that or 2/3 of that in one location or the other so I can maximize the entire day. And usually it takes 2 stands to do that. So we're really focusing on bedding area though. I like that. Where rut lockdown, bucks are getting on excited. They're looking for their second conquest. They might be locked up with does, but you never know when they're going to release and go find a new one. Then the post-rut. This is a hard one. To post-rut to me is, you know, let's say example in West Virginia. It might be the 20th, 24th, 22nd of November. In Kentucky, that might be the same too. Over in Southern Illinois, maybe that's 18th, 19th, 20th, somewhere around there. But it's that time where mature bucks don't want to give up and they're willing to travel a long ways and battle for their last doe that they find in that primary rut. Last doe that they find. Think about that. Where are they going to find a lot of does? They're going to find a lot of does in a high quality evening food source where everyone's pressured the hunting grounds and pushed these deer into certain areas where there's low hunting pressure, and these does that are stockpiling in that area now really. There might be a doe or two or a fawn, late fawn that's coming into heat. And that mature buck finds that. And so I'm hunting big doe groups, especially in the afternoon food sources. Best food sources in the area, biggest doe areas, that's going to be where I'm at. So I'm really focusing on food. Not to say I don't go in the morning. There's still good movement at that morning. But again, these bucks are winding down. They've been rutting hard now for 2 weeks, 20 days. So it's at that time. And what I'm finding is if you have warm weather, that can shut down that post-rut so you don't even see any more activity. It's all at night. Really slams it down. By the time we get into the 10th, 14th around here, things are really shutting down. Not to say that you don't have an opportunity, your chances are going way down. And that's where someone tells me, going back to that story, yeah, it's the 10th of November, I'm waiting for the rut to happen. Folks, you missed it. You really did. You missed all of this. You missed all this opportunity. Done bedding areas here, X patterns here, movement here to food in the evening. You missed all that. And it's unfortunate. When does it take place? Let's just look at some states. Let's go from, say, Tennessee. You maybe lump Missouri into that, but you're looking at Tennessee, Missouri, that area. You're saying, I'm looking at that pre-rut's going to take place sometime during that first week to 10 days of November. And then bucks will be rutting pretty good through that post-rut all the way up until, say, November 25th, 24th, 23rd, somewhere around there. So you're going to experience all of this during that time frame. Let's move over into central Indiana. You're going to be more rutting activity that could take place around Halloween for that pre-rut, the last couple days. and then go all the way through the 17th, 18th of November to where you're starting to experience a really lack of running activity the 17th to 18th. Not that doesn't happen. See, in Michigan, it's not coincidentally, I think that, the rut really winds down about opening day of gun season, which is the 15th of November. Not to say does are not being bred, but by the time you put hunting pressure into it, mixed hunting pressure into it, and then the fact that you're over that peak, bucks are getting tired out, they're resting a little bit more. Again, they can't just go hog wild for 21 days straight or 20 days. Really starting to wind down. When we get up into our area here, you get a really good cold front at the beginning of any of these pre-ruts. You go from 85 degrees in Missouri, all of a sudden it's a high of 69 or 68. Great time to expect pre-rut activity. Major temperature change, major volatile storms that came through to make that. Deer miss their feedings. All of a sudden bucks during that rutty time anyways, and they're ready to go if you have older bucks. But if you just have younger bucks, you're not going to see that activity right in the beginning of the pre-rut. So I always think about that. Again, I'm hunting that roller coaster of weather that we follow through the predictions on HuntCast through HuntWise. Really important to follow that. I follow that in the off season. That's what I followed since the early 90s. We just projected that into an algorithm and infused that into the HuntCast. So you're really seeing that layered effect. Mid-Michigan, the rut's really winding down by the 10th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, right around there. Peak rut more the 5th, 6th, like we are over here in southwest Wisconsin, Minnesota area. Unfortunately, opening day of gun season is right there smack dab in Minnesota for the first Saturday in November, which is right in the peak of the rut. We had Venti, a big buck. We were hoping to live another year. I actually didn't hunt him last year. I wanted to see what happened. I can guarantee if you walked by, I would have shot at him last year. So, but we were really hoping that I was curious what he'd see when he was 5 years old. And he ended up not making it. A couple properties over, opening day of gun season, it's a rut. He gets shot by a gun hunter. The story was, and I haven't confirmed it, I just heard it through the taxidermist through a friend, that the person, the individual who shot it, had a heart attack enough that it alerted the pacemaker, automatically called 911. They came out, found him. He lived, got his buck, and that's the story. We need to really follow up on that at some point. But pretty cool story. The guy lived, he was okay, and he got Venti. And I'm sure, overall, towards the end of the day, a very happy day for he and his family when something like that happens. So that's what happened with Venti. But, I blame that on that rut period where they can be anywhere, especially at night. All of a sudden, it's opening day of gun season, and he's a couple properties away, and that's what happens. That's just hunting. So we look at that time frame from mid-Wisconsin, central Wisconsin. You're at more, could be the 22nd, 24th, 25th, major cold front. I'm going to be on the stand in a bedding area expecting that movement. However, when I get to northern Wisconsin, UP of Michigan, upstate New York, northern Minnesota, I'm looking at the pre-rut taking place last few days of October. And then I'm looking at that rut winding down around the 15th, 14th, 13th, a really tight window there. Because again, if fawns are born too early, they die. If they're born too late, they die. So we're really looking for that sweet spot. When you start getting down to Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Texas, you can have that trickle rut where a rut can take place at any time. Really hard to pinpoint. And if you look at rut maps, compare rut maps from state to state, you can tell there's no consistency from one state to the other because these does aren't going to come into heat from one county to the other different times just because there's a county line. There's all kinds of different, it's a shotgun down there, really is. More of a layered effect from north, and that layer actually comes together more up in the northeast because of the warmer weather over on the east coast, the consistent, and so it's almost, if you look at it, it's more like it's wider towards the west, Midwest, and those wider bands come together going up to the northeast. So Delaware, Maine, something like that. Not exactly, but when you get down here, who knows where it's at. All over the place. Can be all over the board when it's down the south. So what's my recommendation down the south? If you can get some local information, what's cool is the same does will come into heat at the same time. Get to know your does. They'll come into heat at the same time every single year. They do that with horses. Horses will come in, they'll breed, horse breeders will go around the country. They know what horses are coming into heat at the same time. And they do so every year. Does anything to do with the moon, weather, anything? That horse they can count on. They can plan their trips by when they're coming into heat to actually breed. So same with deer. Get to know your does in your area. When you saw rutting activity in a certain spot before, if you think that doe or doe family group is still alive, then get in there and hunt. But you can really throw gasoline on that potential fire when you add the weather. Because if it's 90 degrees in Louisiana, bucks might still rut, but they're not going to move much. However, if it's all of a sudden a 72 degrees, 78 degree day after you had hot and humid prior to that, all of a sudden there's a little bit of temperature drop, 8, 10 degrees, and you know that doe in that area is coming into heat, then that's the time you want to be in there and hunt it. And that can be very local because those does can be bred over a long period of time, because fawns in the south that are born early live, fawns that are born late live. They can be born over a 4-month stretch and still survive, where the UP in Michigan, 80% of the does are bred in that first primary rut. And they do have a secondary rut, but those fawns have to get awful lucky to make it into the following winter, because they're going to be very small, being a month younger going into that winter time. 2022 rut forecast and hunting guide. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope I offered a lot of information for you going in. If you expect it to be, there's different timing. Hope you never fall into that trap based on the moon or whatever kind of guide that you're looking at. Does come into heat at the same time every single year. Come in at the same time. You'll see that difference between older bucks, young bucks in the area. The old bucks, you'll look like the rut's happening earlier. Young bucks, they might be running around, but the amount of sign that an old buck lays down is exponentially more than a young buck. So think about these, the way you can hunt and navigate the rut. HuntCast we help develop on HuntWise, so that you can actually follow this. We've actually updated, we've listened to users, really blended that scientific information with real world experience together to bring you a better experience of when that rut's actually taking place. So I urge you to check that out. The link's in my description of this video. The bottom line is, enjoy the rut. It's a fun time. Learn to use your best stands on the best days, your worst stands on the not so great days. Maybe go play some pool, have some lunch with your buddies on a really bad day. Bottom line is, learn to navigate your stands, apply as little pressure as possible, choose your stands wisely, and you'll really, especially by hunting the weather, it's not that you don't want to be in the wood, it's just, but when you're hunting efficiently and effectively, you're going to find you're not taking a lot of sits during the rut. So that's the only downfall. So if you follow this advice, you might not get to sit very long in the woods, but I want to see you be successful in this season and beyond. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.